Ambassador Hillman, welcome back to Power Play. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Given the news that we saw on tariffs with China and the United States today, how should Canadian citizens feel about our trade talks that are going on with the United States right now?
Well, I think it's interesting. So there was a China-U.S. deal that came out today and the U.K.-U.S. last week. From my perspective, these are useful arrangements to have come into the public domain now, because it gives us a sense of where the U.S., might be willing to go on some of the issues that are more sensitive to it, like sectoral tariffs and other regulatory issues. So I think it's useful to see. Obviously, the arrangement with China is quite dramatic. It's just a pause, but they really have lowered those tariffs down to about 30%. So that's a big change. Probably there's a lot of supply chains around the world that are breathing a bit of a sigh of relief, because the trade between China and the United States doesn't just affect China and the United States. There's, it's a pretty integrated world out there. So it's probably a good thing for Canadian businesses that are kind of wrapped up in those supply chains.
When we look at those two deals, and I take your point that with China, it's essentially a pause until they have an actual landing place. But do you think that Canadians need to get ready and brace themselves for some sort of baseline tariff with the United States? Is that something that business just needs to get used to right now?
I wouldn't say that. I think there's a lot that remains to be seen in where we're going to get to with the United States, obviously. I think it's important for us to recognize that Canada's relationship with the United States is unique to us. It's not the same as China. It's not the same as UK. It's not the same as the EU. It's not the same as Mexico, even though, we've been integrated under the CUSMA for many years, the NAFTA and then the CUSMA. So we're their biggest customer. We have a 9,000-kilometer border. We have deeply integrated industries. They're quite dependent on Canada for a number of commodities that they just don't have at home. There's just a very unique profile that we have. And so the outcome that's going to make sense for Canada, the one that's going to be good for us, I think will be bespoke to our relationship.
So when you say that we have very unique circumstances with the United States, do you think that they understand that? And in your discussions with United States trade advisor, USTR, Jameson Greer, what are those talks like? Are you more confident now this week than maybe you were last week going into that meeting between Prime Minister Carney and President Trump?
I think there's kind of two aspects to how this plays out. There's the technical people who have been doing this for a while, including USTR Greer. He was in the first Trump administration. He worked with USTR Lighthizer when we renegotiated the NAFTA into the CUSMA. He is very familiar with the Canada-U.S. trading relationship. He's very familiar with the details of that, and he's supported by an agency also that has been working with us for years. And then there is, as there is in any government, but probably even more so in this one, a very strong direction from the very top. And the president himself has very clear ideas about trade and sort of reorienting the U.S. profile with respect to trade. So I think that the answer to your question is we have a good relationship with those who have been working with us on trade for many, many years, but they are under specific direction from their leader, which is different than they've been under in the past, including even in the past Trump administration. So it's a bit of a two-part discussion, if you will. And that's why the meeting between Prime Minister Carney and President Trump was so useful. Not only did it set a good tone, not only did it have those two leaders start to get to know each other, but it was clear coming out of that, and even in the public portions that you were part of, that the president is eager to have a positive, professional relationship with Canada. There's a lot of work yet to do. There'll be ups and downs, no doubt, but the tone from the top, I think, has been set in a really positive way.
Because of that tone from the top, are you expecting your next meetings with the trade representative to be a bit easier going forward? Do you think that there is this sort of new common ground that you can land on?
I think it will absolutely help. I mean, we all are responsible to deliver for those that are leading our countries. I think it will help, but I don't think, we are very we are neighbors who know each other well and have a strong desire to do good stuff together. But at the same time, have our own domestic imperatives that aren't always easily reconcilable. We will find a path. I'm quite confident that we will, because it's in the interests of our citizens for us to do so, and therefore we will find a path. But it doesn't mean, as I say, sometimes these discussions can be tough. They can be tense. They can take a little bit of time. You have to find the right route to get where you want to go. But that's okay. Canada is up for it. I have every confidence in us and all of the professionals who work in this area and our political leadership that we're gonna do a good deal for Canadians. It may not look like what it's looked like before. It won't look like anyone else's, but we won't stop till we have the right deal.
How do these two things happen at the same time? And I say that because we have CUSMA that is there, and that even in the Oval Office, the president had said, look, it's working and it's sitting there and it's doing okay. But at the same time, there are these separate negotiations that are happening with the tariffs. Which do you think is possibly going to get done quicker? And I say that because I think a lot of people are looking at the tariffs and saying that has to get done before we even talk about reopening that new NAFTA.
Right. Well, I think that the Prime Minister and the President gave us a direction, which was to sit down and get going on our bilateral issues. That was a pretty clear direction. So I think that that will certainly start first. And the U.S. is having these bilateral discussions with a whole host of countries, including Mexico, by the way. Mexico's in town here in Washington regularly, almost every week, I think. So those discussions are happening. There are things that we will deal with the Americans on that are more bilateral than trilateral. And as I say, the leaders have put a priority on that. The USMCA, CUSMA, as we call it, it comes up for review in 2026. I think the president said there it is. It's coming up for review. Many speculate, could that review be moved up a bit in time? I suppose that's possible. But right now, the priority is to deal, for Canada, obviously, it's to deal with the tariffs that have been imposed, I think, unjustifiably on our country, get those dealt with, and then move on to trying to put ourselves in a position of stability in our relations with the United States.
Reuters is reporting today that the Mexican economy minister is expecting that review of CUSMA to start early in the second half of this year. Is that what you're hearing on the ground in Washington?
I think there are people who are certainly making that pitch. Whether it will come to pass or not is yet to be seen. All I can say is, again, the direction from the top is to get going on the bilateral discussions. And what happens with the CUSMA is something that we'll deal with in due course. But there are varying views on whether we should be waiting to 2026 or we should be getting going on that right away. As I say, for us, fundamentally, our goal is to deal with the tariffs that are in place that are causing harm to the Canadian economy, to Canadian workers, to American workers as well, obviously, and find a place of stability, and then see where we go next.
So when you're saying that some people are making that pitch for that early renegotiation, is that Canada that is part of that pitch to say that we should get this done sooner?
No, I think that we are again focused on the result. And the result that we need is to get those tariffs off. And the president has put forward the proposition that we will do that in a bilateral discussion. That we need to be focusing on what the forum is to get to where we need to go for Canadians. And the president's made that quite clear. So that's where we're going to, we're going to take that up. And then what happens with the CUSMA will be, again, addressed in due course.
I wanted to ask you this question based on your experience in D.C. You've been in the room when U.S. President Donald Trump met with former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau for those meetings, and you were there for the meetings last week. How are the discussions different with that Prime Minister and now our current Prime Minister when you talk about that interaction with Donald Trump?
Well, I mean, there's been, over the years, I've been here as ambassador for 5 years, so I've seen a variety of different interactions between our former Prime Minister Trudeau, and President Trump, and each one, had its own characteristics. Some were tougher. Sometimes in the negotiations, those were harder meetings because we were really trying to grapple with important things, and the Prime Minister had to be strong in that regard, and that can lead to, more tensions in the room. And many, for example, when we were dealing with COVID and we were trying to really cooperate together on COVID, those were incredibly positive and collaborative discussions. So there's a wide range. They were leading together for a number of years. So every discussion had its own context and tone and tenor. I think the meeting with Prime Minister Carney, as people would have seen, and then when we went into the private session, this was absolutely continued, was very respectful, very professional. What I've sort of been left with as an impression is, in particular, that the president was. It was important to him that this meeting demonstrate a positive inclination towards moving forward with Canada in a way that's good for both countries. That was clear. That was his objective. And all of the people that were there supporting him were also supporting that objective. And that is really important for us. I don't think it means that everything, again, not every meeting necessarily between leaders is always going to be without tough discussions, because these are really, really important issues. But it was a really great start. We've got a lot of path ahead of us. There'll probably be ups and downs, but boy, it was important. As I said earlier, this kind of work, there's the work that happens around the table, and then there's the tone that is set from the top, and the tone has been set in a way that is going to be very constructive for both sides.
Okay, unfortunately, we've got to leave it there. Canadian Ambassador to the U.S., Kirsten Hillman. Thanks so much for joining us, as always.
Thanks for having me.